Well, good morning. It is Wednesday, the 30th of June, and it's hard to believe that July is upon us. But today we are in Acts chapter 19, and we are going to be looking at verses 23 down through the end of the chapter, verse 41. So I begin reading in verse 23. It says, "And about that time there arose a great commotion about the way," about Jesus. "For a certain man named Demetrius, a silversmith, who made silver shrines of Diana, brought no small profit to the craftsmen. He called them together with the workers of similar occupation and said, 'Men, you know that we have our prosperity by this trade. Moreover, you see and hear that not only at Ephesus, but throughout almost all Asia, this Paul has persuaded and turned away many people, saying that they are not gods which are made with hands. So not only is this trade of ours in danger of falling into disrepute, but also the temple of the great goddess Diana may be despised and her magnificence destroyed, whom all Asia and the world worship.' Now when they heard this, they were full of wrath and cried out, saying, 'Great is Diana of the Ephesians.' So the whole city was filled with confusion and rushed into the theater with one accord, having seized Gaius and Aristarchus, Macedonians, Paul's travel companions. And when Paul wanted to go into the people, the disciples would not allow him. Then some of the officials of Asia, who were his friends, sent to him, pleading that he would not venture into the theater. Some therefore cried one thing and some another, for the assembly was confused, and most of them did not know why they had come together. And they drew Alexander out of the multitude, the Jews putting him forward, and Alexander motioned with his hand and wanted to make his defense to the people. But when they found out that he was a Jew, all with one great voice cried out for about 2 hours, 'Great is Diana of the Ephesians.' And when the city clerk had quieted the crowd, he said, 'Men of Ephesus, what man is there who does not know that the city of the Ephesians is temple guardian of the great goddess Diana, and that the image which fell down from Zeus? Therefore, since these things cannot be denied, you ought to be quiet and do nothing rashly. For you have brought these men here who are neither robbers of temples nor blasphemers of our goddess. Therefore, if Demetrius and his fellow craftsmen have a case against them, the courts are open, and there are proconsuls. Let them bring charges against one another. But if you have any other inquiry to make, it shall be determined in the lawful assembly. For we are in danger of being called in question for today's uproar, there being no reason which we may give to account for this disorderly gathering.' And when he had said these things, he dismissed the assembly." So, a great commotion because of Jesus, because of the gospel. And, you think about things that are going on in our world today, the things that cause so much chaos and uproar. And it's nothing new, is it? People getting in an uproar over things, and we see here that God was blessing, people's lives were being converted, and these men, because of what was their motivation? It was greed. It was greed. They saw their livelihood. They'd made a great deal of wealth making these little Buddhas, little statues of Diana, the goddess of fertility. And so they were in danger of losing some of their trade. And so they tried to cause an uproar to discredit Paul. So what do we learn? What do we learn from reading this passage of Scripture? As we think about applying this to today's life, things that we deal with in our own world today, are there any parallels? Well, I think a couple things stand out to me, and that is the fact that just like Jesus was despised by those who are perishing, let's put it that way, unbelievers, in that time, nothing's changed today. If you either love Jesus or not, and there are some people that tolerate him as long as he doesn't make them uncomfortable. But as soon as you start preaching the exclusivity of the cross, Jesus said, "I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." Once you start preaching that message, it's not often well received. And so we see a parallel there. But let's look at the specs for a second. Is there any sin for me to forsake? Are there people today that love money more than God? I mean, really, they were motivated by greed, Demetrius and those silversmiths. They were motivated by greed. And so I think it's an important thing to think about. And is it much different from those businesses that stay open on Sunday for profit and forsake the assembling of themselves in church? Something to think about. I know for many years as a teenager, I worked every Sunday because that was one of our busiest days of the week. We were only open from noon till 3, but it was the church crowd that made it so busy. And they went to church, came right after the service, and ate at the buffet. And but somebody has to work during that time. I think it's important to recognize that. And although I don't want to be legalistic, I do think there's a little bit of a hypocrisy there, that we want to judge people if they don't go to church, but at the same time we make it so some people can't go to church. Then you look at it, is there any other sin here to forsake? I don't necessarily see a sin in this passage, but what about principles to apply or promises to claim? Well, again, I mentioned the principle of Jesus said that the world hated him, and because the servant is not greater than his master, that the world will hate us. That's just something that shouldn't shock us, and we should be prepared for that. We see that Paul and his disciples, the disciples of Christ, the other disciples, suffered. They were persecuted because of their faith in Jesus, and although we've been blessed in this country not to suffer outright persecution, those days may be numbered, and that could be changed and very quickly. What about examples to follow or to learn from? Well, I think it's interesting that the disciples kept Paul from going into that cathedral, and he just threw caution to the wind. I mean, he's like, let me in there. There's an opportunity. I got a captive audience in here. Let me preach. I mean, the disciples thought better of it, and protected him from himself. And I think there's a balance, right? We as God's missionaries, as ambassadors for Christ, we need to use good judgment. We don't put ourselves in harm's way on purpose. It's good to use good judgment. I'm gonna have to move back a little bit of that sun. But you think about these disciples. They were worldly wise. They had street smarts. Sometimes in our zeal, and that's one of the things about Paul, he was so zealous, right? Fearless. And but sometimes you need to have a little healthy fear, a little prudence. And so I see the example of those disciples speaking up to Paul and keeping him from going in there and risking his life. What about commands to obey? I don't see a command that's given here, but when we come to thankfulness, I am thankful for God's protection, number one. Thankful that that God protected his servants during that time when that riot they could have easily taken him and the disciples of Christ out and killed them, but we see God's hand of protection on them, even though there was a movement there in the city to destroy them. And that's something we can be thankful for, that God can and does still protect his servants. Think about all the missionaries that serve in the foreign mission field, some of them in places where people are definitely hostile to the gospel, and yet God watches over them, God protects them, oftentimes in a miraculous way. So I'm thankful for that. And that's all I have for today. Hope you have a blessed day, and hope you can come out to Bible study tonight at church as we continue looking at the life of Elijah, the prophet from 1 Kings. So look forward to that, and hope you have a blessed day, and we will see you again tomorrow.